The Times Group's ET Now Global Business Summit is Asia's flagship global leadership forum, designed not to look back at change, but to engineer what comes next. Anchored in the theme, a decade of disruption, a century of change. GBS convenes heads of state, CEOs, policymakers, innovators and futurists for high-impact keynotes, panels and roundtables that turn strategic insight into action. By integrating perspectives from across the Americas, Europe, Asia and Africa, the summit serves as a strategic global forum where disruption is confronted before it becomes inevitability, and long-term economic and societal pathways are shaped with intent.
आज भारत दुनिया की ग्रोथ में 16% से ज़्यादा योगदान दे रहा है और मुझे विश्वास है इस सेंचुरी के हर आने वाले साल में हमारा योगदान और भी बढ़ता रहेगा, निरंतर बढ़ता रहेगा.
The nation today is moving forward on a fast track. Prime Minister Shri Narendra Modi has taken forward the Reform Express in mission mode. This has been a journey of change to accept the challenges of tomorrow.
India today is already not only powering herself from an economic and a commerce point of view, but it would be in the right way of things to say that probably India is powering global transactions and global commerce, and the target for us is to be able to increase this capability.
In this episode, witness a very special address by Y. Rama Rao, Senior Managing Director and CEO, Spark Capital, followed by a thought-provoking panel discussion. But first, let's examine what Y. Rama Rao of Spark Capital said about disciplined capital, which requires clarity, trust and structural reform. Here are some takeaways.
On behalf of Spark Capital, let me first thank the Times Group for giving us the opportunity to participate. A few weeks back, I'm sure all of you have read the same news item. A news item caught my attention. It was about the Norwegian sovereign wealth fund becoming over $2 trillion in assets under management. They built this over 3 decades of disciplined investing. More important, their compounded annual return rate is 6.1%. It's not the fancy 20, 25, 30% that we hear from venture capital and private equity. It's not the fancy 100% Now Gbs Indian mentality, right? It is about 6.1% grown over 30 years. It becomes more than $2 trillion. So patient capital of that variety gives us both an ability to access capital which is available for long periods of time. It also comes with a reasonable rate of return expectation, something which is very important for us to build vital infrastructure, both digital and physical, in this country. This is not the first time. The theme of this year's Global Business Summit is a decade of disruption and a century of change. We are not the first country which is going about doing this. If you look at 1960, South Korea did this. They took universal education for all of their citizens of a uniform standard and variety, as their decade of disruption in the 1960s. The result, they created their century of change. $158 of per capita in 1960 is over $36,000 of per capita today. Singapore did this in the 1970s, and later today we'll be hearing about the Changi Airport and its story, and creating the next $1 trillion opportunity. Singapore did this in the 1970s. They went about investing in infrastructure, primarily ports, and some investment into a world-class airport. The result, $900 of per capita in 1970 is $90,000 today. They created their decade of disruption through physical infrastructure, and it brought about a century of change for the population to become a developed nation today. Japan did this in the post-World War II phase. They created a goal to have universal health care for all their citizens. And it's not always about money, right? They created access to health care for all of their citizens as their motto in that decade. They created a century of change. Today, Japan has among the world's longest living population. Our time is now. We can create the next decade of disruption, and it will in all confidence we can say this, create our century of change. the Viksit Bharat 2047 being a significant milestone in that process of century of change. We have 21 years to get to 2047. It is 3 cycles of infrastructure investments that we can make in these 21 years. It's long enough for that. It's long enough for us to transform our education and energy systems. It's long enough for us to actually dream and make a reality of a fab to finished product semiconductor ecosystem in this country. But unfortunately, it's just not long enough. It's also short enough for us to fall for and find excuses not to make it. Patient capital and availability of patient capital and access to patient capital should not be an excuse for delay. It should actually be the call for urgency with discipline. We are here to understand where does this capital come from. And if you actually go down looking at the data points, and for those of you who have been fortunate to work during the first phase of reforms in India in the 1990s, you will understand that we were roughly $300 billion of GDP that decade, give or take, $60 billion of annual savings, hardly enough for a nation of our size then, despite the cost adjustments that are there between now and then, for us to be able to use any of our domestic savings to invest into critical infrastructure required for us to grow the next 30, 50, 100 years. We did not just have it. We were heavily dependent on foreign capital flows, both for portfolio as well as direct. We were short of trust for the long-term capital from outside to flow in so easily. We have significant domestic capital to harness. And if we channel it properly into creating the right investments to disrupt our next decade, as this theme suggests here today, we will go about creating a Viksit Bharat 2047. We will also go about creating a century of change for ourselves. We have $300 to $400 billion of annual savings from the households in this country. We have over $1.2 trillion of assets in EPFO, insurance, and mutual fund AUMs in this country today. To begin with, we have $1.6 trillion of domestic household savings in one form or the other available for us to start making this disruption today. What does it require is the next question. But we have enough sources of capital, even domestically, even while attracting the right kind of foreign capital that we need in the first place. We look for the highest ROE next quarter. We are valued on the basis of the highest ROE that we generate next quarter. In the process, while it is important to generate ROE and important to generate profits, and I am not the supporter of long-term loss-making, scale-building business per se, while it's important to focus on ROE and it's a healthy factor to consider, it's important that there are certain times in nation building, one has to move just from an excessive focus on ROE to actually building capital, building assets, infrastructure, and buffer zones for ourselves to deal with moments of crisis. When we do such investments, that moment it looks like inefficient use of capital. But believe me, when a crisis hits us, and it will hit us at some point in time in the future, that will be the difference between survival and bankruptcy, as have several nations seen during the 2020 pandemic. Patient capital understands that need. Patient capital deals with that inefficiency as a necessity, unlike impatient capital, which will run away at the first instance of inefficiency being perceived, not even seen in the first place. In our goal for a Viksit Bharat 2047, the first and the most important milestone is our goal to achieve a $10 trillion economy by 2035, a decade of disruption to create $10 trillion economy. But for us to really go there, we need to focus on creating a lot more gross fixed assets in this country. It is estimated, and these are estimates, they could vary, anywhere between $300 to $400 billion of incremental annual investments are required for us to put in the form of gross fixed capital formation if we have to go to achieve the goal of $10 trillion. Not an easy one, but patient capital is the answer. It has the resources, and we can get there with that capital coming into us in the first place.
Next in line was a panel discussion where Arpita Vinay, Senior Managing Director and CEO at Spark Capital, along with other industry stalwarts, opined on the topic based on the resilient core, balancing domestic momentum with global volatility. Take a look.
And Arpita, when you talk about India's capital markets, 10 years hence, do you think we're in a good stead? Do you think the health of equity markets would also grow leaps and bounds, as would all these other sectors?
Absolutely. I think in a country that has abundance of land and labor, the thing that comes between us and growth is access to capital. And in that sense, financial services is the lifeblood of any economy. I think what has changed this decade is we are not at the mercy of foreign institutional investors. You know the numbers, but despite a massive 2.5 lakh crore outflow last year, it's the confidence of the domestic savers which kept the capital markets, depth, breadth, and resilient.
Yeah.
And that's actually the source of capital to most industries, whether in the equity capital market space or the debt capital market space. So absolutely, for sure. And, I think Mr. Martin Sorrell spoke about it earlier. World Bank, last year largest economy, this year fastest growing last year, fastest growing this year, fastest growing in the coming year as well. I don't think we get the adequate representation from a capital market point of view. So the growth from here, obviously without sounding like an unhinged bull, is going to be one way, but more in terms of depth and breadth as well, more in terms of innovation as well, more in terms of being able to provide access to capital to the companies that need it beyond the top 200 ones of them. That's really where the animal spirit is. So yes, for sure.
Arpita, when you talk about capital markets, all that one hopes for is that the animal spirits, the entrepreneurial sort of, streak that India has right now, that should continue, right?
Absolutely. And I think in context of technology, it in some manner has been a game changer for financial services at the bottom end, access to credit, access to a formal banking financial system, all of that democratized through technology. Specifically in the industries that we are, that I'm a part of, which is ultra HNI, high touch industry. Technology has got to enable business models where you're able to offer personalized advice at scale without having an army of people to do that. And what that means from from a business strategy as well, the kind of skill set, the kind of equipping, the kind of people that you end up having, the kind of systems that you end up having, very differentiated than what you've done in the past.
And also entrepreneurship,
Sure.
spirit as well, right? People such as you who have donned many hats in your career, but have built a business. You
Sure.
want the country to head that way.
I'm sort of glad you touched upon that. I've had a pretty conventional, from a very personal point of view, come from a small industrial town, the eldest of 3 daughters, started out in Tata Steel, a conventional career path, decided for whatever reason to get into financial services, and an MBA landed me at HSBC, and realized after a while it was an exciting run, but bitten by the entrepreneurial bug in terms of what was happening in the industry around me. Didn't have the courage to do it all alone, got together with a few colleagues, and that was beginning of a journey which was very, very different from what I had thought life would be like.
Next in line was a health panel where Kishore Rijwani and Amit Rathi, managing directors at Spark Capital PWM, spoke about living longer, living better, the new economics of longevity. Take a look.
It's probably for the first time in human history that living to be 100 is no longer some abstract notion or an exception. I think it's increasingly becoming something that all of us need to consider and actually plan for. If you look at India, which constitutes a significant part of the world's population, the average lifespans have more than doubled over the last 7 decades since independence. In fact, there are estimates that say that by 2050, the number of Indians with an age of 60 plus will be in excess of 300 million. Now, that's almost the entire population of the United States. And that's a massive market opportunity, a massive market demographic. Now, when you further consider that people today aspire to better standard of living, better quality of life, and are willing to pay for it, then this just becomes a very compelling opportunity for businesses, for industries like pharma and healthcare, for investors, and of course for folks like us who do wealth management and financial planning. In fact, I can tell you that at Spark Capital, we spend a fair amount of time with individuals and families just on the topic of multi-generational wealth and the planning around it. And what we are finding is very interesting. Traditional retirement models are no longer holding up. Newer multi-dimensional models are taking their place. The so-called retirement ages, the so-called retirement periods are also getting longer and longer. And I say so-called retirement because, it isn't about taking a back seat in life anymore. It's more about starting a new chapter in life. It's about pursuing a new set of goals and passions. It's about staying active and productive for as long as possible. And this puts further emphasis on personal health and well-being. You're trying to cover wellness, you're trying to cover personal fitness, you're trying to cover business requirements, because financial well-being is also extremely important, in all of this. And while we are actually planning for all of this at Spark Capital, who is actually out there trying to make it happen, trying to make all of this viable? Well, today amongst us, we have 3 exceptional leaders who are at the forefront of India's longevity revolution, if I may call it that. And I would like them to come up on stage. And I'm going to hand over the moderation of this discussion to my colleague and counterpart in Spark, Mr. Amit Rathi.
So I'll start with the first question to Dr. Mathai. So Dr. Mathai, you've worked decades working on integrative medicine. You've seen over the last decade where people are now starting to focus on their health span and not just their lifespan. You're seeing the fundamental shift from people focusing on their health and not just wanting to live long. What is it that you think that your contribution is so that a common man understands this and takes it deeper?
Indian population slowly getting more and more aware about the consequences of disease process, so that they will be now more and more coming forward for health improvement and prevention and health management. Because the cost of any disease treatment is very high and time consuming, and the general awareness that majority of the medical conditions are coming out of lifestyle disorders. So better to have lifestyle management, that is themselves by eating habits and lifestyle modifications and all that. And also the India's ancient medical systems, like Ayurveda and naturopathy and all the systems provide a large amount of solutions to prevent and improve their health.
Rahul, my next questions to you. Thyrocare, really speaking, what we thought could never happen. Thyrocare has almost democratized the diagnostic market in India. So from your vantage point of view, what is the pattern that you're seeing? Is detection helping Indians to become healthier? Or is it that from an education point of view, we've started to look at that a lot more seriously?
We've always been preventive health focused, right? The Thyrocare Arogyam, which is what is known, has been growing faster than Thyrocare for many, many years, and today accounts for almost 30-35% of our revenue. So at least in the Thyrocare world, what we see is 35% of our customers come for a preventive health checkup and not a reactive health checkup. So it's definitely growing.
And Rahul, do you see AI changing the way preventive care or, diagnostics will play a role?
I do believe AI has not yet evolved to the point where, it's giving, I would say, great advice. So sometimes it can be right or wrong. So it's just important that we are cautious on that front, and I think everyone is talking about it. But I think digital makes a huge difference.
Dr. Sonia, as people are living longer, I'm sure you are seeing a lot more patients coming to your hospital. is there any way, and the diseases are becoming chronic, so which means that patient needs to spend a lot more time as compared to what they would have done in the past. So does the hospital needs to change itself in the way it's geared, both financially and otherwise?
Definitely, healthcare is changing. Hospitals are a very reactive place. I got chest pain, I'm running to the hospital. I have an emergency, I'm running to the hospital. I have a problem, I'm going to the doctor. But that chronicity, that let me do this long-term care pattern is not there. And now, definitely as we are aging, and me being in the field of neurology, I see a fair amount of chronic diseases that are coming up, whether it's dementia, Parkinson's, or even when we're looking at diabetes, people have it for years and years. The problem is now that even as hospitals, everybody needs to start realizing that it's not just one approach that is going to work. What is actually going to help patients is an integrative long-term approach where you have multiple fields coming together.
Thank you everyone.
In another special roundtable session, Animesh Raizada, Managing Director and Chief Operating Officer at Spark Capital PWM, opined on the topic of the agentic BFSI enterprise, architecting for autonomy and resilience. Here are some high points from the discussion.
So I think a lot of what has been said is correct, that there is complexity and there is impact. These are the two things which decide what we want to automate or automate decision making itself, right? Now, there is one more element in a private wealth business, which is the delivery of that particular service. Because a lot of it, when the discussions are happening, there is empathy, there is intuition, there is creativity, all of that gets into the discussion, right? So for me, there is 3 levels of autonomy. One is when there is low impact and it's relatively lower complexity, something like a routine customer communication, or when a client is using my app, then in-app navigation support, right? These are the kind of things which can very easily be done. There can be autonomous decision making completely. There are things which are not